come back for the second. India have won the test match. India have won the series. They're going to get back for two. India at home. Lords goes wild.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of the 81 All Out podcast. This is Siddhartha Vaidyanathan at Sidvi on Twitter. And today we're going to be talking about a classic cricket book, Mike Marcus's War Minus the Shooting, a book that has become very special for us at 81 All Out for reasons that you'll soon understand why. First, let me introduce the guests here. My co-host, Mahesh, who is at Cornered on Twitter and who was also part of the podcast in March when we discussed the same book, that is War Minus the Shooting, with Sharda Ugra and Fidel Fernando. We will tell you exactly why we are discussing it again. But first, welcome, Mahesh.
Hey, Siddhi.
Yeah. And also a warm welcome to Osman Samiuddin, who I can introduce as an author, a magnificent writer, a senior editor at ESPN Cricinfo, and various things. But I will just stick to the Wasim Akram of cricket writing. Hi, Osman.
Hi, and thank you for that rather too generous an introduction.
Yeah, I should maybe in a few years you may even reach the level of the Shaheen Shah Afridi of cricket writing.
Oh,
you can aspire to that.
Of cricket writing, but with an action like Ataur Rahman. The great.
Ataur Rahman as a left-arm seamer would have been a magnificent sight, for sure.
He would have been Sohail Tanveer.
No. Let's not get there.
Yeah.
So let me first talk about why we are bringing up this book again 8 months after we did the earlier time. So quite a bit has happened since that podcast. Actually, the podcast has given rise to a republication of a book, actually. And as a formal announcement, we have republished Mike Marcus's War Minus the Shooting. It's available on Amazon, and you can get a paperback in most places. And if you live in India, we have a e-copy available. Of course, in India, you can also try and order the book on Amazon.com. And, if the shipping is affordable, you can get it shipped. But so that is the good news. But we want to talk about how we got here and how we got into republishing a book. A lot of it, which was pretty much by accident. But also something that we've been thinking about for a while. So, at 81 All Out,
just to interrupt, it should be the how and the why also.
How and the why, of course. Yeah, for sure. And as many of our longtime listeners are aware, we at 81 All Out have been doing podcasts about books for a while now. We love discussing books. We think that that's a great way to talk about cricket. It's also, there's a love for the written word and the language among those of us who, are part of 81 All Out. And, Mahesh and I have been talking about cricket writing and cricket books ever since we, got to know each other. This around, say, late last year, earlier this year, that conversation also veered towards how the whole economics of cricket writing and how things are so difficult for those who want to write cricket books because, unlike the common perception, it's not like cricket writers are getting six-figure advances, and it's not like they can write a book and then live off it for the rest of their lives. That's far from the truth. A lot of times, Osman as an author will confirm that for you.
Yes, and very much confirm it.
Yeah, and a lot of times, basically, the writer is doing this in the spare time when he or she has another full-time job, and often these books don't get any major advances and don't sell too much also because it's a niche market. So it's a labor of love most of the time. So Mahesh and I were thinking of ways in which this could change. Of course we knew that a cricket book may never sell 1 million copies, though if one does, then more power to it. But we also were thinking of how we can find ways in which we can say, if a writer writes a book, get it to the people who actually like reading. And we felt that was a problem for many cricket books. They don't actually get to people who like cricket reading, partly because of the marketing, partly because, there's just so much going on in today's world. But anyway, to come to the point, we did a podcast with Mudar Pateria, who was a cricket writer back in the 80s, who went on to the stock markets. And he, in the podcast, he told us this magnificent story about Mushtaq Ali. And I linked that story, of course. But he spoke about how Mushtaq Ali came to his college when Mushtaq Ali was at a much later stage in his life. And he came, and then all of them are like, sir, please show us how to bat. And he came as a coach, basically. He came to coach them for a bit. But then they were like, sir, we want to see you bat. Because Mushtaq Ali is huge in, in India's cricket history. And Mushtaq Ali was probably like 60s that time. He just said, okay, he'll take the bat. And then some guy who was a pretty good college bowler bowled. And
this is a club. This is not his college. It is a little
there's not a college.
This is a little later in his life. So they have this cricket club where Mudar is actively involved. And Mudar was on letter correspondence with Mushtaq Ali. And he thought, inviting him for a sort of coaching clinic of sorts would help his team and whatever. He wrote to him, and Mushtaq agreed, and Mushtaq Ali came. And then there was this club fast bowler who was, trying to impress Mushtaq Ali, right? I mean, there's this legend. And he was in his 60s. And he bowled quite fast and fierce. And he got hit a couple of times or whatever. And
Mushtaq Ali got hit, did he?
Mushtaq Ali got hit. I mean, he was in his 60s, 68 or 67 or whatever. And then the guy was bowling at full throttle. Then he was batting right-handed. He kind of switch hit him for a 6. And the narration was almost, you remember the Victor Trumper Boot Factory Window story? It was that level of legend. The way he narrated was so beautiful, so breathtaking. If you have to go back and reconstruct it and you kind of start beginning to doubt some of the veracity of it, you're going to suspend it. You're like, no, this is such a great story. I'm not going to even scrutinize it anymore. And he talks about that.
Yeah, he talks about that reverse hit, which basically went on the sort of a roof of that building, and that roof had like a skylight.
Library. Yeah,
of the library.
Of the library, and it broke. And because these guys were so scared to even go and tell them that there's a cricket ball which broke through the library, they didn't even go and fetch it. And then he went on to later on regret saying that could have been a sort of great, museum.
Where was this, by the way? Where did this happen? Which city?
Calcutta.
Oh, superb.
Yeah. So he told us this story, and then we were so taken in by the story, and then immediately the conversation went on to Mushtaq Ali's book, which is called Cricket Delightful, which is quite popular, famous in very niche cricket circles. But we then realized that we couldn't get the book because it's out of print long ago, and even online you can get like a pirated copy, but you can't even read anything there because it's all gibberish. So what we ended up doing is we got a contact from Clayton, a friend of the podcast again, Clayton Murzello, gave us a contact for the main person at Rolly Books. And so we wrote to that person at Rolly Books and said, listen, I mean, this book is out of print and you have so many other books in your catalog that are out of print in cricket. So is there any way in which we can sort of come in and we can get the rights to those books to publish them? Because there'll be a small set of people in cricket who will like reading them. And he said he will get back, and eventually he didn't. And so that didn't go anywhere. So then we were thinking, okay, maybe then the next way to go is contact Mushtaq Ali's family. Maybe there's somebody there who can help us, etc., etc. And we were in that sort of zone where we were already thinking about cricket books. And then this this War Minus the Shooting podcast with Sharda happened, Sharda and Fidel. And again, it was quite a popular podcast, and all the listeners were like, where do we get this book? We can't get it. And on Amazon, the minimum price for that was some $900 or something. It was going in the black market. Yeah. It was like people are selling it for like $1,000 and all, like $1,000 on Amazon. So then obviously immediately this thing came together, and we're like, okay, Sharda knew Mike's partner, who was Liz, because Sharda knew Mike very well. And so I wrote to Liz Davies, who was Mike's partner and who is a accomplished lawyer in London. And I wrote to her and said, listen, we have done this podcast. You can listen to it and you'll probably enjoy it. But, given that it's 25 years since the 1996 World Cup and 25 years since the book was published, would you think that the publisher would want to come out with an anniversary edition? So she said, yeah, that's a great idea, and I should check. And she did, because Penguin is the one that held the rights until then. So she checked with Penguin, and Penguin said, no, we have no interest in publishing this book. So then she got back to me and said, no, I mean, they don't seem to have interest. So then, I mean, I guess thanks to what we were all talking about anyway, I said, can I buy the rights? Can I acquire it? Because I'd like to publish it. And she said, sure, that's a great idea. And the next thing you know, she has got the rights back from Penguin. She has, she said, okay, let me know how I transfer the rights to you. We just have to sign a contract. And we were basically like we were like, okay, what do we do next? And then we realized that the best way to go about this is to set up a company, a publishing company, which we eventually did. We have set it up Mahesh set it up in Singapore. It's called 81 All Out Publishing. It's like a proper entity that we set up. And then we got some help from lawyers in India who are also friends on Twitter and things. I mean, who helped us like with the contract and what to do and what do you own, what do you not own, all the
forget the contract. Okay, so some background to this. When we were talking about the book was also the time Sidvi got his first book out, right? As this guy who just reads books, like I'm not into writing, right? So for me, I understand that all authors care about their contract. They know what is in the contract. They know what is their right, what is the distributor's right, and so on. So I asked him, like, dude, I mean, what's the thing? Do we ask the ex-publisher or do we ask the author? Like, do we go to Rupa or do we go to Mushtaq? Oh, he's like, oh, that's a good idea. Let me go and check my contract. So he had no clue. So I said, what if the distributor screws you? What if the publisher says, okay, that's first 1,000 copies printed, I'm not going to print anymore. What do you do? And then he didn't have an idea. And then thankfully, I spoke to a lawyer who told me what is IP rights, how does it work? And copyright always stays with the author. Distribution rights go to the publisher. Sometimes there is a finite time period. Sometimes there's no. But the author always has the right to claw it back if they want and so on. Which, after all that clarity, is when we jumped in. So after 2 years of starting with Mushtaq Ali's idea, we went nowhere despite having so many writer friends in the circle.
Can I tell you, like, at least from my own experience also, that I don't think I looked at my contract for the Unquiet Ones until... from the time that they sent me the contract and I signed it till the time it was published, so that's a gap of like 7 years, by the way. I don't think I looked at my contract once. I still, like, the other day or very recently, I was in talks with them for something related to it. And Shruti, who we all, of course, know Shruti, that she kind of, looks over whatever legal documents I have sometimes. And she was like, have you ever looked at your contract? And I was like, I've looked at it. I read it. It hasn't made sense to me ever. But she's like, okay, you're an idiot. And before you ever sign any other contract in your life about anything, even if it's your bloody second nikah nama for a shadi or something, you please come to me and show me the contract, and I will just make sure that you're not being completely screwed over in some way or the other.
Yeah, so I was just going to say that's one reason why writers have agents, so that they don't have to read the contracts. That's one big advantage of having an agent, is that the agent will read the contract. Yeah. So, and I'm the kind of person, unfortunately, who has probably not read a single contract in his life. And I just go straight to that sign and I sign. So it is going to get me into some deep trouble at some point, but thankfully it hasn't.
If you had at least known that the rights lie with the author, you wouldn't have wasted 2 years,
Yeah, that's it. You just want to do the book. You just want to write. You don't sign and stuff. You just want to write.
And we were so naive. The publisher is like, sort of just... blocking us. He was entertaining us for a while. After a while, he realized he doesn't have the rights anymore. He didn't even respond. We kept going back to him, no response. And after 2 years, after talking to this lawyer in Chennai, there's a guy called Swaroop. After talking to him, I realized, oh my God, no wonder the publisher didn't respond.
And talking about publishers, by the way, Penguin, who had the rights to this book, did not have the manuscript. They had lost the manuscript somewhere. Yeah, they didn't even have the manuscript. So we, of course, Kartikeya, who has been on this podcast very often, sent us a PDF copy of this book that he had got from some university sort of catalog kind of space.
No way.
So we went about converting that bad PDF into a Word document through Google Pages or something, and eventually landed up with a Word document which we had to heavily clean up.
So there is a software that does that quickly, I presume.
Not too quickly, but there are softwares that do it.
Some level of automation is there that doesn't involve you sitting down and typing everything.
Yes. We didn't have to type everything, thankfully, but we had to do a lot of cleanup. And then again, coming back to the podcast, we again did a podcast with Gideon Hay for our 100th episode on Shane Warne. And at the end of the podcast, we spoke to Gideon about this project that we were undertaking, and we're going to come out with the book. And Gideon was so happy and so, taken in by it. And he said, what a marvelous book. And this is a great idea. And he immediately just offered us a forward. He said, do you want an introduction? I'll give it to you. Do you want a forward? I'll give it to you. And,
perfect.
And that was actually quite indicative of the general sentiment around this. Yeah. Whoever we told the book, everybody, was immediately ready to help, whether it was, lawyers or whether it was writers, authors, everybody. So I think, I think this book and Mike also has left a deep impact on people, and his writing, people genuinely value it. And so anyway, I mean, we went from there to eventually, going through the whole process and putting out the book, and now it's on Amazon. It's published. You can get it as a paperback, hold it in your hand. So,
wow, man.
Yeah, like if we have rights to a font, they will make sure that font is there. Yeah.
Superb.
Yeah. So technology has been a great boon for this.
Who would have thunk it?
Who would have thunk? Yeah.
And those 2 years between Mushtaq Ali and Marquesi was spent on figuring out these models on what works best.
Yeah, anyway, so it's out, and hopefully, this is just the beginning. There are any number of classic and good cricket books that have been out of print for long. And they may not even be great, but they may be very good reads. And we are happy to, bring it out.
One which I even back then struggled to find was Richard Cashman's the history of Indian crowds and teams and stuff. It's an amazing book. A bit dry and stuff because he was an academic, I think, but amazing book, which again is like at that point in Indian cricket history, it is just phenomenal to have a book like that as a resource.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that
even
should definitely
this one,
be on
right,
our
Inside
list.
Out, Mushtaq Mohammed's biography, which we had Nadeem F. Pracha on the podcast, and he talked quite,
that was the one that he wrote with Richard Sydenham, right?
Yeah.
Mushtaq, yeah.
So we've been trying to get that, and it's completely out of print. I mean, there are plenty of books like that.
I actually got a copy. Kamar, the great Kamar Ahmed, lent me a spare copy of his, and Saad Shafkat passed it on. But Nadeem Paracha said that, if you want to understand that 70s Pakistan team, that is the book to read.
Yeah, it's a good book for that. I leaned on it quite a bit, as well as obviously like first-hand interviews and all, but I leaned on that quite nicely for, in fact, I'm just on a very side note, I'm involved with these guys in Lahore who are republishing A.H. Kardar's first tour books.
Oh, wow.
So he used to write tour diaries of all his, like the first 3 or 4 tours that Pakistan went on. So that's India, England, and the West Indies. Mm-hmm. And, the copies of those books are impossible to get now. Like I got them from some antique collector of books back in like 2006 or something. But they're now having them republished in Pakistan and hopefully making them. And it's his son who's doing it, who's leading the way. His son is like a very accomplished economist, used to be the governor of the State Bank of Pakistan.
Wow.
And he's having those books now republished and redone and stuff. So they'll be available, which, I mean, like this project, I think it's great to have all these books out and about and available again.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Why wouldn't we want to read that? I mean, that's the thing, right? I mean, you in England and Australia, I mean, the great credit to that, the publishing industry there is that, they have retained so much. And you can even go back to like the 1800s and read books that, were written by cricketers and journalists and things like that. I mean, the Lord's Library or any of the big UK places. But, that is the big challenge for people like in the subcontinent to actually not only new cricket writing, but actually preserve what has already happened before.
Older cricket writing,
yeah. I mean, and there is a lot of good ones, but things have just go out of print and people forget about it. So,
what is that? The really famous one, the Diary of an Unknown Cricketer? No, what is it?
Autobiography of an Unknown Cricketer, Sujit Mukherjee.
Because that's not available in print anymore.
No, that's also out of print. And I mean, that's again been on our list for hopefully.
I've never read that actually. I would love to read that book. You will have one buyer for sure. If that book comes out, you will have one buyer for sure.
Yeah, you might get a relatively affordable copy on Amazon actually, if you look.
I'll wait for you guys to publish it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's a better way to go about it. Yeah.
Actually, if he buys on Amazon, he's going to pay a heavy cost, and then he's like, "I already paid $80 for it. I'm not going to buy yours."
Exactly.
Yeah. So I mean,
then Sidney used that goodwill of Gideon's pod, and then followed up with an email saying, "We're looking for a." I mean, he did promise a forward, so he followed up saying, "If you can send us in 3 months or something," and then 2 days later he sends us I don't know. There was some other email. He says, "I'm going to write yours tomorrow." I wrote some email and he said, "I'm going to write your forward tomorrow." And like in a couple of hours, there was one which was just everything in place. And this is, putting the whole Mike Marques's writing career in like one page. And that comes from having read all his books and keeping them in this sort of summary form in his mind. And it is just like not even thinking, just writing.
And then to use such beautiful language to kind of produce it. Like Sidvi forwarded me the forward, and it's just Gideon. Like he must have written about at least 7 other things that day, including like some work on a book, which will be his 50th book, which will all be as great as the other books that he's written. Like he's a freak. He's an absolute freak in that sense.
And going back to the point, he probably wrote 7 other things that day for no money. So
yes.
Yeah. And after receiving that, we felt so guilty. And I reached out to him saying, no, I feel really guilty. Please tell me, okay. I didn't even ask him for an amount. I just said, give me your address. I need to transfer the money. It's a privilege to be associated with Mike. And I'm so glad to be associated with this particular book of Mike. And that's all I want from this.
Yeah,
that's all fine.
Absolutely. I think that speaks to like just the impact this book has had on, I don't know how many people bought it in the end, how many people have read it, but I'll know this much, that everyone who has read it will not forget this book ever. It's one of those, you just don't forget it.
Yeah, and the bottom line for us also is like, I mean, more than anything, just the fact that I had read this book, in the late night, probably in the early 2000s, about the 1996 World Cup, which was so formative for me. The book was so close to me, and the very fact that you have a certain ownership and control of a book that you so adored and that was so formative, that itself is enough for me. I mean, that itself is a big prize to have.
Yeah, to own the rights to like a book as amazing as this. I think this time I was, when you had told me about this, I was reading it, and I think it's my like third or fourth reading of it since I first started reading it. And I think the first time I read it was probably like you, must have been around the time that I joined Cricinfo. So it was like 2003, around that time, because everyone was like, this is the book. And then I read it again. I remember distinctly because I've got this bookmark which I've had it in. So this is the Lake Lodge in Colombo, which is of course Charlie Ostinakara's boutique hotel in Colombo. So I read it during the 2011 World Cup because every time something like that happened, Marcuse's book for me was like the one to go to. Any big event in the subcontinent, you have to like just have Marcuse with you while you're writing about it, while you're covering it or whatever, because it's the essential guide to cricket in the subcontinent still, after all these years.
Yeah, and I mean, now that we're getting into this book and the podcast, the one thing that was remarkable for me when I read both Mike Marquise and even a writer like Mike Coward, who has written books, who has written about India, is that it's so vastly different from like 95% of the writing from the Western lens about India, right? I mean, the biggest thing for me to read this book was, a foreigner is writing about India like this? I mean, like I wouldn't even imagine an Indian writing about India like this, because of how deep he gets into the situation and how he is so, attuned to the concerns of the vulnerable. If you see, like, if he's looking at a scene, Mike Marquise is always looking at the weakest person in that scene. Yeah, he's not looking at the powerful. He's looking at the oppressed. And that was what struck me about this. It's like, wow, here's a guy who's coming from abroad to India, but just looking at the most vulnerable people. I mean, that's really amazing. And again, he's not doing it like poverty porn or anything. He's not trying to, make it like not at all. He's actually very empathetic towards people who are going through those struggles. Yeah.
I think it was just, I think it was his setting, right? It was the kind of guy that he was. I think he identified with those causes across the world.
Marxist.
Marxist, across situations, anywhere like he saw that people were being oppressed or, people were losing out on something. So that lens comes through in almost everything he writes. Like, his book, I was saying earlier, his book on Dylan is essentially a book on like examining the lyrics of some Bob Dylan songs. That's all it is. It's an entire book examining lyrics, and even there he's applying this kind of tint, which is this Marxist tint on how he understands everything. So it was natural that it came through. And like the best bits are like the tone in which he is kind of, I don't want to say passive aggressive. He's not passive aggressive, actually. He's scathing, but in a really, I don't know what it's like, a dry way in which he's been scathing about power and capitalism and the corporate structure of that World Cup and the corporatism of that World Cup. The tone in which he applies to it is just so like Hey, what do you guys know? Yeah, you guys don't know anything about the world. You're just there making your money and selling your soda pop and all. Like, you guys don't know anything. And this is the perch on which I'm standing and I'm writing down. And I love that thing, that he was just writing down on the, not obviously the oppressed, but on the powers that be and the powers that were. He was permanently looking down at them, like with a certain amount of disdain. And I just love that tone. It was like, if you want to write, this is the way you should do it, basically, about these things.
And there's also comedy, right? I mean, there is this meeting that he has with the Pakistan Cricket Board chief, Arif Abbasi. And there, Arif Abbasi automatically assumes that, here's a Westerner who has come and he's like, no, we don't know how to organize a World Cup. World Cup should be in England only. And
then he switches.
No. Yeah, Mike Marcus is like, no, I like it here. And then immediately Arif Abbasi is like, oh, yeah. All those English people are...
And by the way, this is the genius of Arif Abbasi. I've of course, known him for a long time now. He's very old now, but his genius was that he was this chameleon. So wherever he was, he would just be that person. So he could snob it up at Lord's, and he could dalmia it up in some Pilcom or something. He was amazing like that way. He wasn't one guy. Whichever way the wind was going, he was there with it. And that's, I guess, how you become so powerful and so influential in these things, right? And that's how, he was there for the 87 World Cup and all as well. And he was a driving force behind the man who got money into the board. But yeah, Marcuse's meeting with him is just it's just perfect in the way he just switches immediately. Like, oh no, this guy's a leftist Marxist. Okay, I'll go with him quickly. I'll be like he is.
So, sorry, just to go back on the point of him talking for the vulnerable and kind of having a hang of everything from above, everything that was operating below. One of the things that I observed, especially looking at it from the prism that we see today, is that someone like that who's concerned for the underprivileged and marginalized today would be a lot more activist in tone, and basically it's me, the noble guy, fighting for them versus the other people. So, but here there's a lightness of touch. There's acute self-awareness. In fact, there's a place where he says, in all my political and activist life, I've never had the privilege of backing a winner. I hope that doesn't fall on me when I'm backing Sri Lanka in this World Cup. So, there's that acute self-awareness right through. And
there's a deprecatory tone. Yeah, self-deprecating.
Self-deprecating tone. Plus,
and here's the guy who had written, sorry, just to interrupt, he had written a book called Snatching Defeat from the Jaws of Victory about the Labour Party's loss to the Tories. And that book, by the way, I have read parts of it because it is published there. And that book is so funny. I hope to read the whole thing. But that book is again about how the Labour Party just bumbled its way through that election. But yeah, go on.
Yeah, so there's that lightness of touch, and he's able to sort of, capture the contradiction more than making it a dirge and a sort of putting down of certain choices that certain governments made or certain organizations made. Even his criticism of the embracing of globalization of all three economies. It is not so much that this is a morally poor choice. It is that you made choices without knowing what you're getting yourself into, and he puts it down and he connects it all in a very organic fashion. He starts with something about Pakistan cricket. Then he goes back to the IMF driven sort of globalization and how that has caused inflation for the most marginalized. And that has resulted in a currency depreciation. So he's able to catch all this in one paragraph and move on. And he's not lamenting on it for too long. He's just showing the mirror. It's for you to see what you want to see.
He's not he doesn't have a hectoring tone at any stage throughout it. And I think one of the best things, and I think this speaks of the time that he wrote it in and the time he must have grown up in, was, this is not virtue signaling. He's not being performative. He's not, coming out on social media and saying, I am, like you said earlier, I am this noble fighter for the oppressed. He's just writing what he sees through the prism of what he has learned his entire life, and through the prism of the philosophies that he believes in. And he's not like you say, there's a real lightness of touch in the kind of stuff that he says about the ills of globalization or whatever. And more than even what he's it's not like he's hectoring or talking down. He's kind of just, he's forewarning us that, okay, bhaiya, if you keep going down this way now, so dekh lo something. You might come with the stage that we are in now in cricket.
You'll remember me.
I read this book. I read this book as a precursor to where we are now in cricket, in the game. This is I would say it's ground zero. Of course, you can argue and say that 83 World Cup happened and stuff. But this is ground zero of the cricket that we see now. Everything about the cricket, the game itself, and the commerce behind it, the politics behind it. One of the most amazing things about this book is how he captures that, and we take it for granted now, but it's how he captures the jingoism and the nationalism of the crowds. We take it for granted, yeah, of course, because we're used to Twitter and everyone is like that times 10. But he was writing about it in like 1996, which, it was kind of just coming up to the surface then. So it's amazing in what he's kind of, what are the things that he's focused on, which now seem, oh yeah, of course he made those choices. At that time in 96, those choices weren't obvious choices to make about what to write about.
And also, I think Mike Marquesi had gone through this process already, because he was a big fan of the New York Yankees when he was growing up in New York. And so that is when, in the 50s and 60s, that is when baseball was changing. And baseball was going from this innocent American pastime to this, more corporatized setup. And there was like these huge conversations about whether you should corrupt this game this way and whether corporates should come. And so Mike had already seen all this in America. So he's basically saying, boss, all this has happened and it is going to happen again. You guys at least can do something about it now. We can't. I mean, the Americans are well past that stage in 96. But you guys can at least think about it now. But you're also not thinking about it.
I think he talks about it in, I'm trying to remember which game it was. It's not the India-Sri Lanka at Delhi. It's another game where he refers to how, the crowds at baseball games in America, they basically are watching the game as they watch it on TV, except they're live. So all the music and the ads that come in their faces and the screens, the electronic screens and stuff. And he senses a little bit of that. I think I've written it down. He senses a little bit of that.
It's probably the India-Australia Bombay game. Mumbai, because
that's the one. That's the one. Yes, exactly.
Sachin, Chance and all that. Yeah.
That's exactly the one. And there's such a, he says that he loves watching floodlit games. Like, he's unapologetic about that. It's not he's defending that or being defensive about it. He loves it. But he's just like, like Mahesh said, there's that forewarning there that, look, I've seen crowds going to a live experience and actually just wanting what they see on TV to be replicated in that live experience. And I'm seeing it here in 1996 at the Wankhede. And, lo and behold, 25 years later, we have the IPL, which is like, you're basically watching a TV experience, but at the ground or whatever. It's amazing how he's kind of drawn those kind of threads or parallels or whatever.
We have the IPL trumpet.
Which is like
that's
that.
True. Yeah, that's true. I felt the
right?
same. I felt the same when I attended a game in America. I mean, because it's like, it's all manufactured. It's like, every time there's like a strike, you have a certain tune that plays. Every time there's two strikes, every time, there's like the game is on the line, you have that thing that plays. So the crowd is almost like instinctively like reacting to what they are doing. They are not actually proactively creating anything. Yes. And in the subcontinent, that was what Mike saw that was different. And of course, now things have changed to such an extent that the big screen is showing you what to do and you're doing it. So it's become the same thing. It's like people are saying, clap now. And I'm like, okay, you have to tell me to do that.
Yeah. That Kiss TV thing must also be coming to the subcontinent soon, huh? When you do the proposal on the big screens or whatever.
Yeah, and anyway, it happened in this World Cup, no? When one of the Indian cricketers proposed. I mean, It's just on its way. Yeah. So
we're there soon.
No, about the IPL, one of the things that when you read the book now, you're like, how did we not see IPL coming? Like, in fact, going by this book, going by the narration of this book, 2008 seemed too far away. It should have happened a lot earlier. And a lot of us were caught by surprise even when it happened in 2008. Like, he could see what was going on. In fact, even in Gideon's forward, he writes about it, right? The fact that the cricketers' bodies become the prime real estate of commercial choice is something we are seeing now. And this TV screens, sort of occupying advertising is something that he saw even then. So he could predict not even predict. In fact, it's to give him too much credit. He could just talk about it as a matter of fact that this is where we are heading. Yeah. And in fact, to my sort of misfortune, I read it very late in my life. But had I read it then, I'd have probably been better prepared for IPL. I'm like, it's delayed. It's probably too late.
I think, so this is 96. I have a feeling, wasn't Modi's first time that Lalit Modi made that plan? This was around almost exactly this time, right? When he made that plan.
Yeah, he said it was 96.
And stuff. 96, 97. So, I think it was in the air. for sure. Like you have guys like Lalit Modi swanning around and stuff and these crazy ideas. And then, Dalmia and this World Cup happens and the Coke and Pepsi thing happens. I think it was there in the air, definitely, that something is happening. But I think it goes to show the absolute embeddedness of Babudam, bureaucratic Babudam in the subcontinent, that it's still taken like 14 years, for 12 years before the IPL actually happened. It absolutely to do with the inertia of like bureaucracy in these countries, that it still took like 12 years or whatever after.
But what about this counterfactual? India wins the 1996 World Cup. They start an IPL on a one-day level because T20 didn't even exist then. They start like a league on a one-day basis in, say, 97, 98. And then would T20 even exist?
It wouldn't have. No way.
I don't know. It would have come, yeah. I think it still would have come, because, again, the T20s is much like, Stuart Robertson, the ECB marketing manager who did the focus groups or whatever. I think that finding was going to come anyway. It may not have taken off, especially if it had been left to the devices of the ECB here. I don't think it would have taken off in the same way. But I think at some point, someone would have said that, listen, boss, 7.5 hours is too long. We need to cut this thing down. And where can we cut it down? Not the number of players, but the number of overs or something. I think, I don't know if it would have been as big or whatever, but I think that shortening was going to happen at some point.
But 7 hours of advertising, right, in India, and then the subcontinent, we were watching 7 hours. It was not like we were finding it too long.
And in the 90s, we were watching everything. We were not only watching India, we were watching like complete, like all teams play.
And their best response to this was to have the Sahara Cup, right? Remember the end of the book?
Yeah.
He sees North America, Friendship Series, Sahara Cup. And you're boss. That's not happening.
That's the other thing where Mike comes in, because he's seen it all before, right? He knows what's going on. So Sahara Cup, India, Pakistan are talking about dosti, friendship, Sahara. He's like, boss, television. Yeah. That's all matters. You guys can say all this. Yeah. You're doing this for Indian primetime television.
Yeah. Bas. 9 a.m. in Canada, that's fine, but it has to be 6 p.m. in the subcontinent time. That's all it has to be.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, they're going to now host the World Cup apparently the T20 World Cup in the USA, right? In 2024.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's exactly what's going to happen. You think they're going to be like night games in the USA? Are you kidding me?
No, not at all. And they're not, although somebody was saying that I think they're looking at some stadium in Oakland as the venue for an India-Pakistan game, because you can get up to 60,000 people there maybe. And also because it's close to like all the Silicon Valley, Indian CEOs and stuff. So I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I found that like a nice, also the way to look at that ending is that, here we are again 25 years later and they still haven't broken into the North American market. It still hasn't done anything. It hasn't done jack to the North American market.
Don't discount the efforts of Messrs. Shane Warne and Sachin Tendulkar in starting cricket in America.
All-Stars game. Oh my God.
Okay, so we spoke about, Mike's talking about the day-night games and all that. I have this quote that I've noted down. He said, "I'm hooked to floodlit cricket. For me, it combines grand opera, stadium rock, pantomime." And what a perfect way to put it. I mean, it is it. And, instead of what is amazing is like, even though he was talking from a Marxist lens against globalization, here's a guy who loves floodlit cricket, which is like the poster child of globalization in the subcontinent,
Of capitalism.
I mean, recently I had somebody in Canada. I had gone to Canada. Recently I had somebody tell me, how much of power you people waste on watching 7.5 hours with those floodlit stadiums. How much of water you waste in watering those things. And I'm like, boss, all that is conversations for 1980s. Yeah. Now you please don't start all this now.
Yeah. Please, this is a rock concert, okay? It's opera also. Read Marquise. This is what you should be thinking about these day-night matches.
And this sort of contradiction comes right through, right? Like one is batting against a lot of these ideas, but in a way, he's also part of all these things. He openly admits that he likes day-night cricket. In fact, even when the World Cup is heavily criticized for being too commercial, he's saying, but I love it, and even in terms of Pepsi Coke, there are sort of instances where he says, I was eating this with Pepsi and with Coke and whatever. So there is no activist stance. He's just saying, this is what I'm observing. That doesn't mean I don't take part in it.
Yeah, he doesn't, by the way, that whole Coke Pepsi chapter, it's not like he's painting them out to be this evil, the evil emperors of the world, these evil conglomerates that are ruining the world. He's actually sending them up for what they are. which is that, like you guys, like you guys are just, I mean, he's again, like I can't think of a better way of saying it, but he's kind of just looking down on them from a height with some sniggering and some, like, he's not saying that, oh, you guys are evil and you're going to destroy the world and all this. He's just like, look, you guys are a joke. Okay. Let's just, like, what you guys are doing, the phony wars that you guys are having, it's actually a bit of a joke, but it's part of this spectacle. And like you say, at the end, he says clearly that I love this World Cup. I absolutely loved the whole idea of this World Cup and this World Cup. And he, hits out at all the English who kind of say, take the World Cup as proof that, the subcontinent can't host a tournament like this. It's all very sniffy and looking down. And he takes total pot shots at them, which is, again, in that the power versus the coming power, I guess, not the oppressed, I would say, the subcontinent at that stage, but they were the coming power at that stage. And, England, Australia still saw themselves very much as the establishment, I think, at that point still.
Yeah, this book came not too many years after his, of course, most famous book, which is Anyone But England. And, where he basically has done a surgical autopsy on English cricket. And as I think Rahul Bhattacharya had the best line about it in the foreword, where he says, he marinates the English soul in, and then he basically, skewers it like line by line. I'll link that piece. But the point is that Marquez, that Cola Wars chapter, the interview that he does with that Pepsi official, Deepak Jolly, that's how all business journalism should be. Every business journalist news should be like that interview. It's
just resorting to like slogans, every 3 sentences coming up with a slogan. But it's the right choice. But it's the right choice.
Everywhere he says, yahi hai right choice. Yahi hai right choice.
It's superb how he does it. It's superb. Go on. Sorry.
The thing is, what I was saying is that in this social media universe, with the extreme positions that you're almost compelled to take, and with the volume being almost compelled to be so loud, that Marquez-y tone is probably impossible.
Yeah.
I mean, you can only find it because Marquez-y is not only critical, but he's also funny.
Yeah.
And he's critical in a very different way than, say, to give an Indian example, P. Sainath, who has been critical of globalization ever since the 90s. Sainath is critical in a much more strident way, and a much more like, there is an activist tone there. Yeah. And, because he's speaking from the point of view of the poorer people, the farmers and all that. But Mike is not that way. Mike is saying, okay, this is happening. And look at these crazy decisions that people are taking. And you have to think about it. And it is you who is going to be impacted. So if you don't think about it, then nothing else is going to happen, which is a very different tone.
The perfect illustration of this attitude, I think, was, he writes a little bit about Michael Henderson, the British journalist. He first says that, Henderson, of course, hated his book, Anyone But England, because Michael Henderson was this like little Englander kind of guy. But immediately he says that, I took the time and he took the time to kind of get to know each other a bit more. And I didn't mind his company. Here's a guy who's like, not liked a book that Marquez has written, but he still approached him and hung out with him and discovered that, hey, like for whatever he comes across as, and Henderson, by the way, not many people in the English press box would have many great things to say about the kind of guy that he was. Writer, he had some great lines and stuff. But one guy who did is, I feel like, a guy who was very much of the Marquez school and that generation is Rob Steen. And he said, that Henderson was, okay, whatever people think of Henderson, but actually, this is why he was the way he was. And when you got to know him, so, there's a little bit of empathy. For whatever stance that you take, you still have empathy for like the other person. And you don't completely polarize yourself from them and see them as this great evil. Like, somebody, that exchange between a writer and Henderson today would have just degenerated into just wars on Twitter and subtweets and galis and all this and all that. And Marquez was just like, well, actually, he comes across like this, but actually I spent some time with him and, he has his good points. And that's it. And that's kind of how you should be dealing with this, this kind of difference of opinion or whatever, difference in stance and philosophy. And I just think it was illustrated really well by that little interaction he has with Henderson in this.
There's a symmetry to this point. One is about sort of people who don't agree with him and how he kind of comes around to them and has a civil conversation with them and has a relationship with them. The other one is this equation with, let's say, someone like Ram Guha, for instance, where you feel like they're joined at the hips, from one like a from a distance, you would like to think that they joined at the hips. They're that close a personality, but they're not. And even when they were close, in the book, it comes across very obvious that they were close at that point in time. And whatever Guha gives his verdict on the way the Bangalore crowd behaved after the win or whatever, typically if you're that close to someone like Guha, you kind of tend to mirror that point. But he's actually critiquing Guha as well in his response, saying, no, that's not the reading of it. The people are not behaving because they are, of course, they hate Pakistan, but it's also the propaganda. They've been built up to react in this way. You've built up this Indian cricket team as the representation of the nation. You've built up the support for the team as supporting for the country. And that's the reaction you're going to get. So there's no point singling out the reaction of the fans when the whole ecosystem is built for that. Right? So one is the equation with Henderson where he's able to reach out to him. The other one is the equation with Guha where he's able to kind of move away from him and kind of critique him from a distance. So that symmetry is quite beautiful to read, actually.
I'm still waiting for Guha's Anyone But India book.
Anyone But India. And what a ripe time for Anyone But India.
I mean, he wrote it then, right? Marcus mentions that Guha said that I will one day write an Anyone But India. And this is probably the best time for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that whole India-Pakistan match, I mean, as I was there, I was young then and I was there at the match, but the mood was captured perfectly in that book. Like for me, obviously, you want India to win and you want India to desperately win that game. It's a quarterfinal. And as a fan, you're like, oh, India should win. But the kind of fear that the potential Pakistan victory generated, and the kind of nationalism that the Indian victory ended up, like the ugly nationalism that the Indian victory eventually ended up causing, you felt like, am I really happy about this match? I mean, of course, okay, India winning and going to semi-final is good. But the mood at the end of it was not one of elation. It was one of confusion. It was like, I don't know, is this how we should be celebrating? Or is this how we should be, like, when Pakistan is doing well? I mean, Sohail and Anwar were like smashing the bowling in the first 10 overs. And it was scary in the crowd. It was like, there was obviously absolutely no hint of appreciation towards that. That is one thing. But there was also a hint of things could get bad. And it could well have been the Eden Gardens before Eden Gardens had Pakistan won. And, what are we seeing today? I mean, exactly what we saw then. I mean, much worse, of course, because of the political situation. But yeah.
Is that one of the interesting things I found, and kind of counterintuitive, I guess, because of what that match has come to represent, was the Eden Gardens game, where he kind of goes through it and says that, these are not the kind, again, he's like comparing it, of course, to his experiences elsewhere, but he's pointing out for what it is, that these are not the riots of football hooligans.
Yeah.
It wasn't a riot in that sense, like where, people started killing each other and hurting each other and stuff. This was a very different kind of, right? And that again, like, I had to read this time to remember that actually that was the case, that it wasn't like the kind of, mid-80s hooligan riots that we used to see on European football and English football, but it was a very different one. And he's very aware of that fact in pointing it out, and this is the thing about this book is, that all these moments that you remember from that time, you have like a exaggerated picture of all of it. Whereas this book grounds you very much into what was happening in that whole, even on the Pakistan angle, some of the stuff about the political situation in Pakistan at the time, Benazir was in power. The 90s in Pakistan is of a certain generation, it's a much cherished time in Pakistan, even though things weren't great. There was constant political changes, Nawaz Sharif and Benazir Bhutto pretty much fought throughout the 90s. It was the birth of democracy and the death of it all because, Musharraf came into power in 99 October. He took over power and stuff, and Zia-ul Haq had died in 88. But I remember it, people of my generation mostly, I'm saying, we used to go to Pakistan every year or whatever. And you remember this fairly vibrant kind of time in that country. Not chaotic, but like a little messy, but still vibrant and generally upbeat. And I think he captures some of that really well in this book, which is, again, remarkable for a guy who came in, and I don't think he'd visited Pakistan that often before. And I remember having conversations with him when we then met, the one or two times that we met afterwards. And he remembered, for example, he remembered the music that he wanted to hear from Pakistan. And so I sent him some CDs of music eventually, which is when he sent me the Dylan book or whatever. But, it was just amazing, what he would remember and how he kind of how he kind of showed that time to be. He captured something of Pakistan amazingly well, something of Pakistan in the 90s, just in this book. Characters like Arif Abbasi, characters like that communist friend that he has. He captured some of it really, really well in this book.
And he got Imran so well back then.
I mean, if he wasn't going to get him well, I mean, the other guy who I have to say got him well early on was Dalrymple in I think, is it The Age of Kali? I think The Age of Kali is the one in which he goes traveling with Imran, I think, and he gets him really well in it as well. But yeah, for somebody like Marcuse to nail him on, like so spot on, and he got Imran at this time in his life when he was just starting his political party, and he was the guy. And now we look at Imran now, but some of this still kind of rings true from what Marcuse was writing back then. It's phenomenal. It's absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, and so two things about this. I mean, one of the things about Marcuse and his nuance comes out so well pretty much early in the book when he's talking about all the withdrawals, Australia and West Indies threatening to withdraw from Sri Lanka, which they eventually did. And, for me reading it at that time, I had never read like a kind of approach to that topic with such nuance from every single perspective. And, it was like, from an Indian perspective, it was like these guys are just needlessly creating a big fuss about it. But what Marcuse does is like even goes one step further. He says they are not only creating a big fuss about it, they are also being extremely hypocritical. That when there are attacks happening in London and when there are attacks happening in Australia, they are then saying that it is unsafe for us to go and play there. So, he actually brings in a larger point that me, my younger self would not have considered. I mean, now, of course, we know. I mean, now England withdraws from Pakistan and for a tour, and then the next day they play a game, even though there's a threat in their own backyard. There's a women's game that happens. But that is one point. The other point, of course, is that what was in connection with this republication is that even though he has basically taken the pants off England, even in this book, not as much as anyone but England, but even in this book, he doesn't go to a single England game because he says they're the most uninspiring team to have ever played one-day cricket, which they were at that time. Yeah. And then he basically, goes after Michael Atherton for his buffoon statement. Atherton calling a journalist buffoon. Despite all that, Mike Atherton has provided us a generous blurb on the cover of the book. And, he was kind enough to say that, hey, I may not have fond memories of some parts of the book, but it's a classic. I can't deny it.
The thing about not having gone to Sri Lanka and Australia pulling out, there's a beautiful line. And it's so Marcuse to get this. So he's talking about, it's right towards the end. He's talking about Mark Taylor's post-final press conference. And he says, that Taylor says, people tell us when we're here that we have to understand other people's cultures, and we try very hard to do that. But I'd like people to look at things from both sides. Put yourselves in our shoes and look at the way we live in Australia compared to the way other people live in the subcontinent. So Taylor is being a little bit sniffy about this. And then Marcuse writes, a month later, a deranged gunman took 35 lives in Tasmania. 4 months later, a bomb exploded at the Atlanta Olympics. But then, this is the way he captures Taylor. So, these days, you can imagine somebody, maybe rightly, but the tone would have been off, just completely ripping apart Taylor. I might have done it myself, in fact. But Marcuse says, Taylor's remarks were patently sincere, and his intention was, as always, constructive. So he's saying that. I can see where he's coming from. But he goes, but what a cosmos of misunderstanding was revealed by his comments. It's such a beautifully written line, that he's seeing this side. He's saying, chalo, Taylor, I'll give you your due. I can see what you're trying to say, that, you guys come from a far corner of the world and you're not used to this. But look at what you're saying in light of what does happen. And he skewers him, but he does it in such a way that, is kind of lost now. In, that kind of critique, I think, is one of the things that I miss the most about that time and about those writers. That nuance and that trying to understand is gone. Now you just have to stand up and say, Mark Taylor, you're an idiot. There's no other opinion on this. If you disagree, you are Mark Taylor yourself. You are an idiot like him, which I feel like in here he's not doing that.
It reminds me this particular line
that Fidel raised about this particular point, which I wanted to bring up while Osman was reading it. And that was a great point, because Fidel said that when Mark Taylor made the statement, if I were to read it at that time in the 1996 sort of subcontinent thing, you would actually sympathize with Taylor. Like as Indians, as Pakistanis, as Sri Lankans, you're like, yeah, what he says is true. He comes from Australia. He shouldn't have to go through this. So it is not just that Taylor is under that disillusionment. We were willingly surrendering ourselves to that kind of a narrative. Of course, now it's a little different. We can easily call the bluff. But at that time, the mainstream society operated that way, even for the subcontinent people.
Yeah, and that particular way in which that particular line of Marquesi, where he basically is giving Taylor his due, but also basically taking him apart. It reminded me of, on a tangent, it reminded me of my favorite book review ever. It's basically just one line about the famous James Joyce book Ulysses. Virginia Woolf, who was a terrific writer herself, has, in the middle of some long essay, writes a one line about Ulysses. Now, Ulysses is like this ultra long epic book which people have varying views about. Something it's the greatest book ever, something it's the most useless book ever. But Virginia Woolf has captured this by one line where she says it's a memorable catastrophe, immense in daring, terrific in disaster. And I'm like, how do you write such stuff? How do you do it?
Amazing.
You basically you praise it, but then you finish it off in the same line.
And you finish it off like that. Like, a whole cosmos of misunderstanding behind you. Like, boss, over. A whole cosmos of misunderstanding. Amazing. I had a thought just last night, actually, when I was just like going through the final bits of this. And, in terms of the theme of commercialization and the sport changing and the money coming in, I think like a great companion book to this, actually, it should be seen maybe as a companion, is Not Quite Cricket. People think back to Pradeep Magazine's book now, and they think of it as like an expose of match fixing, which of course, to a degree it was. But I feel like the stronger points in that book were kind of almost like a sequel to this. It was picking up on what had happened to the industry in the 4 years that Marcuse had not been there. This, Not Quite Cricket was kind of expanding that, look, this guy wrote about this creeping into the game during that momentous event. And now look where we are. We're 4 years down the line and he's talking about the influence of broadcasting on these things. But that's actually like a great companion book, or even a sequel to this, of, what it led to. And of course, we're still waiting for the definitive book for, since the 2000s or whatever, what has happened to cricket in the subcontinent. But I think, and I think they were friends. I think they knew each other fairly well.
Yeah. Pradeep is in fact generously thanked in the dedication.
Yes.
And they covered quite a few games in that World Cup together.
Yes.
And he might have even in Delhi, he might have even visited. They might have even spent much more time together. And yeah, they were very close friends. And in fact, I told Pradeep about this project of ours, and he was extremely thrilled. And he said that Mike was a really generous soul. Good, you're doing this.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So no, that's true. And in fact, I see another. For me, it's like Not Quite Cricket is definitely a companion to this book in terms of the game and where it went and the money. But I also see another companion book in terms of just the way in which you cover a momentous event, which is Rahul Bhattacharya's Pandits from Pakistan. And, of course, that doesn't have too much about the economics of the game, but simply, the manner in which they go through the journey together and the travelogue bits and the writing about the subcontinent, Mike writing about Pakistan and Rahul writing about Pakistan, there's also a lot of connections there. So I would look at this as a trilogy, in fact, to read if you want to understand Indian subcontinental cricket in the late 90s and early 2000s.
And I think, again, both, Rahul and Mike both, the Rahul had not been to Pakistan before then, probably would have had even less interaction with what Pakistan is like, I think, other than through cricket or whatever. But, the nuances that they understand and what they understand about the country, remarkable, really. And it takes an outsider, I guess, to kind of see. That was one of the most amazing things about Rahul's book, was that how he got Pakistan, which, again, Marcuse gets the subcontinent in his book. And Rahul, in a similar way, got Pakistan so well. Just by meeting, just by looking at the game, not the game, but looking outside the game as well, which again, Marcuse, that's through and through, is that he's not just there covering a tournament, which I've got to say is a luxury no longer afforded to almost anyone who goes to such a tournament or travels in such a tournament, that you can't just like spend days maybe covering a game or maybe not going that day. Even the Sunday newspaper writer of the English fantasy, like guys who would go on tours and do one piece every week for the Sunday thing. Those guys are finished now. Those guys are or dwindling quietly. So that it's afforded to nobody really now. And it's something that's really missing from the game. Like because this is part of the game. You're covering it. This kind of lens you need to apply to the game, because it's impossible to just look at it for what it is. I mean, I would love to read something good on somebody traveling through the IPL, for example. Anything, just like traveling through the IPL season within India. It would be amazing to read something kind of broad brush about that event, which is like a central part of the Indian calendar now, I think, right? Pretty much.
Yeah, I mean that would actually be, if the sort of sequel is being waiting to be written for Mike Marques's book by somebody who's actually traveling around in the IPL and writing about it, and not just writing about the cricket or the contest, but writing about the ecosystem and writing about how we got here. Are we asking enough questions about what is happening, and are we asking it from the prism of, it's not just in the prism of like morality. It's not saying this is not cricket and this is cheap and all. That is of course ridiculous, like simplification. But asking it at a much more fundamental level, like, is this how we think cricket will sustain itself? Like, are we really naive enough to think that Test cricket cannot sustain itself by itself? Are we really thinking that, if the IPL stops tomorrow, are we really thinking cricket will stop tomorrow? Why? And why are we thinking that way?
And how have we gotten to that point?
Yeah, I think that's a book waiting to be written for sure. So, I mean, let's probably, we've spoken a lot about the book and stuff, but, Mahesh and I spoke about our favorite bits in the book in the previous podcast, but maybe you can sort of talk some of the chapters. Like for me, honestly, the India, Sri Lanka chapter, the semi-final chapter was extremely refreshing for me, because he talks about that whole bottle throwing incident in a way that, I hadn't encountered before. He actually goes and talks to people who were involved in throwing those bottles and says, why did you throw those bottles? Can you explain to me? And then he actually goes on to say how, you charge so much for a ticket for a guy, somebody who can't even afford it. And then you expect them to come and be happy when India loses.
Because by charging that much, you're basically almost selling them the dream that, boss, your team will win. And if they don't, then it's all over.
One, selling the price, and throughout, I mean, you've been built in this dream of your team winning as this ultimate achievement for the nation, not just for the cricket team. So you build it up as nationhood. Naturally, when nationhood fails, you will have consequences. That's what he's saying. And the funny part about that is that, it is so refreshing for me. Like I still, like the other day when Sidvi asked me to proofread the last two chapters, I was reading it again. And this is like the 10th time I'm reading the chapter. I'm still blown away by the originality of that insight. And he was able to write it pretty much in real time, right? He processed, this book was, he must have written these passages the next day or a week later or whatever. This is not looking back in retrospect. And like since 96 till now, I have not read a single take which has been anything but this variant of Nation Shield.
Yeah.
And I have lived with that, right? A part of me still feels guilty for being an Indian because that happened in India. Like it had nothing to do with me. Cricket team is not, now I'm acutely aware of the fact that the cricket team is not representation of the country. And even if it is, I have nothing to do with it. And it happened in Kolkata. Like, there are so many layers away from me, but a part of me still feels guilty because it happened when everybody thought it was nation shamed. So it is not just the fact that, the society, those times you had writers like this. No, even in those times, there was only one writer like him.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I do wonder, actually, I don't know if you ever found out while you guys were like dealing with Liz and stuff, like when did he do the writing for much of it while he was traveling, or did he do it like after in retrospect? I wonder how he kind of did the...
So during the World Cup, I know that he was writing a bit on a daily basis. Like he was writing comment pieces for Indian Express. He wrote about that buffoon incident. He was not writing match reports, but he was doing more comment pieces. But I do know Sharda was mentioning that he was an assiduous note taker. And, he would take notes about everything. And so that probably what happened, that he took all these notes and then he went back and he then thing. But even the fact that he took those notes, that even in those notes, he must have written, I mean, all this perspective must have come in then itself. It wouldn't have, it's not like he went back and suddenly he's like, oh, it happened. No, it's all happening.
No, you were saying about the chapters. Like, I mean, I love the entire thing, but I think the couple of chapters, one was the nest of VIPers, which I just absolutely love in like how because this DDCA thing, like I was unaware for the longest time of how factionalized and how corrupt or how like clownish they were. And then, when I started touring India for matches, like journalists would always be forever, because all the journalists are also bloody based in Delhi. They're kind of part of the problem. So they would always be complaining that DDCA, like you'll never have come across a more corrupt organization than this, and little articles in newspapers about DDCA doing this and DDCA doing that. So to read that and to read him just capture it so perfectly, and again, like without being hyper judgmental about it, he's kind of he's chronicling it and he's telling the reader in a very, very readable way, like a very reader friendly way. Who's the administrator? Sunil Dev, I think, is the guy, right? Sunil Dev.
Yeah.
Just the way he writes about him, and then of course he describes, the rush to get into a crowd. Like this is one of the like least understood and documented facts of like cricket in the subcontinent is the sheer hassle it is now to get to a stadium to watch a match. It's a pain. Like no wonder people want to watch on TVs, because to get to a stadium before you even enter the stadium, which is usually a dump, okay, now stadiums are getting better. At least in India, they're getting better. In Pakistan, they're kind of catching up slowly. And in Pakistan, you now have the extra security angle, right? So you have like 8 layers of security that you have to go through before you get into a stadium. Like the sheer, just the effort, the Herculean effort it takes to get into a stadium. I think this was one of the first times, and probably the only times, that somebody has written about it so well and linked it again to the wider picture, which is like, boss, look at the DDCA. What do you expect? And he's got this wonderful line, which I forgot to note down. I don't know if I'll be able to find it right now, but it's this one line really short line about how basically there's so many security officials there, so many, but all of them contribute to doing nothing at the end of the day. And he writes it much, like I'm not doing it any justice at all. He writes it much more concisely and beautifully. He just summarizes basically an entire like genre of law enforcement in the subcontinent, which is that, you will have 3,000 police officials at an event and there will be no law and order there. And he just does it so well. Like it just struck me that, this is one of those things that doesn't get written about. And certainly not in as entertaining a manner as he has done it in this book.
No, and also the fact is that Mike saw English football in the 80s and 90s when, the hooliganism and the stadiums and, the sort of the tragedy at Hillsborough where people died and all that. So see, while he is critiquing and criticizing what is happening in Delhi and the stadiums and all that, at the end of the day, he's also putting it in the big picture and saying, okay, all this is fine. Yeah. But, we are talking about a comparison where people are dying in your, own stadiums. Who are you to criticize?
That perspective always.
Yeah, who are the English journalists to criticize this? Have you even looked at what's happening back home?
Yeah.
So, that sort of macro angle is there. But yeah, that Sunil Dev, this has to be one of the great lines in any profile written by anyone. So I'll just read out a passage. He says, Dev first became DDCA secretary in 1984. And then he quotes Dev. He says, I was too young and inexperienced and straightforward, he sighed. I was still too much of a cricketer and too easy for politicians to get at. And then Mike says, sitting opposite me in his suit and tie, with his round face and pencil mustache and whining about his enemies, Sunil Dev looked and sounded like someone who might once have been young and inexperienced, but never straightforward.
But never straightforward. Those 3 words at the end are just beautiful, but never straightforward.
How do you write that at the beginning of a profile? Basically, you're telling the reader, okay, now whatever else you're going to read about him, just keep this in mind, okay? I mean, these are the sort of lines that, I look at, I read, and then I'm like, it just makes you stop. And you're like, wait, what? He actually said this? How did he say this? So and that's also the joy of this book.
I just went to that chapter again. Also, this line I remembered. He's talking about Sunil Dev's factionalism, like his intrinsic factionalism. And he says, attacking factionalism in others, Dev revealed his own paranoia, the telltale sign of the arch factionalist himself. It's just like, it's perfect. Like, this is, you're talking about all this, and it's so true. It's so true of all, like Sid, you've covered these kind of things. It's so true of all administrators who have come in cricket boards across the subcontinent, that, they come in and they talk about factionalism of others, and he was against that. And they're doing exactly the same thing in their paranoia. They're doing exactly the same thing and being that very representation of what they're talking about, which, again, it's just insane how he's done it. I'm looking for that line about the police officer, but I don't think I'll find it just now.
Maybe we can find it and link it. Yeah.
Large numbers of non-ticket holders gained admission. As so often in India, security managed to be heavy-handed, yet also ineffectual. It's perfect. Like, you can write so many words about trying to explain that, but security, both heavy-handed and also ineffectual. Like, they're checking you, and you can picture it, that they must be there checking you and doing all this and taking out stuff from your bag. Meanwhile, the guy with the bottles and the lighters is walking through from somewhere else. Like, we've done it. Walked into these, I remember going into Delhi to watch the 2005 Pakistan-India game, the ODI game. And I remember, like, the biggest buzz among journalists beforehand was, okay, how are we going to take the cigarettes into the press box? Because, the Delhi, they'll be so heavy-handed with the security. And I remember people, like, sticking cigarette boxes into their socks and stuff. And so this is what happened. Security was there going, checking, taking 5 minutes to check everyone, and still not finding the cigarettes that were there in the bloody socks. People limping because they couldn't walk properly because of the cigarettes in the socks. And the police saying nothing about this. They think, chalo, andar chalo. 5 minutes of checking. Acha, ab jao. And everyone walking in with their cigarettes. Heavy-handed, yet ineffectual. It's like just perfect.
And for all you know, the security inside the stadium were probably bumming cigarettes off the people who were smuggling it in.
Of course, eventually when you went out to smoke, they were like, "Acha yaar, ek mujhe bhi de do." Like, in no questions asked. Kaise aaya, andar kaise aaya, kaun ho, le lo bas. Crazy, absolutely crazy.
So the other thing about this book is, and I'm so thankful that Mike Marquez was present in, 2 games that was symbolic of that World Cup. One was, of course, that solidarity match that Sri Lanka played against India and Pakistan, a kind of match that will probably never happen again. And a kind of match that rarely even happened before. I mean, they used to have exhibition matches and all that. But to actually have, before a World Cup, which had all these security fears, for a joint India-Pakistan team to go and travel to Sri Lanka, meant a lot to so many people. And, Ranatunga mentioning it after the World Cup final. I mean, his greatest moment. And he says, we thank India and Pakistan for coming and playing there. So that tells you. So that, I'm glad Mike was there. He has this lovely, lovely chapter on that. I mean, Cricinfo carried it as an excerpt recently. So I'll link it. You can read it. And the other game that I'm really happy he went to is that Kenya-West Indies game. I mean, what are the odds that you have the biggest upset in, like, probably at that time in cricketing history, and you have Mike Marquez sitting there and watching this?
And he sets it up all the way so brilliantly, right? He's like, we were there thinking, yeah, what game are we at? Like, why are we at this game? Nothing's going to happen. And then he builds it. Like, his actual, like, one of the things is that his actual game writing was so beautiful to read. His game writing was such a light touch to his game writing. Like the passage about Aravinda's batting in the semi-final and stuff. And, throughout that game about Lara, he just cuts Lara down to size, by the way. Like, he's just not interested. What's he doing? Why is he playing these shots and all? And Curtly Ambrose, when he comes out with the stare and he's angry. It's just a beautiful, like, the way he sets up that entire game it's just brilliant. Him being there and him, I think Henderson is with him at that game.
Yeah. And Henderson is also critical of Lara.
Yeah. And they're both, Henderson more is like, why am I at this game? Why am I not at some other major game? Nothing's going to happen here. And suddenly, it starts happening and you're just like, wow, what a game to be at. What an absolutely amazing game to be at, Kenya West Indies.
Oh, yeah. And I'm glad you brought up the Aravinda point because, that to be at the Eden Gardens semi-final, to watch Aravinda De Silva play that innings. And I'm so glad Mike was there because that's one of the great one-day innings probably ever played, given everything, the context and everything. And even just the sheer beauty of the batting. Yeah. Mike brings it out in such vivid terms. I mean, you can almost visualize how Aravinda was going after the bowling there. And we don't have.
He's very like keen in pointing out that it wasn't like Jayasurya. It wasn't slogging or it wasn't like going airborne. It was just batting as at that time, whatever correct batting was. It was.
I think he even uses the line
test batting at an accelerated pace.
Yeah, that's right. Accelerated pace. Yeah, that's right. That's the one. Just beautiful. And I mean, he was even then. It's remarkable. He was out in the 50. I didn't realize he was out as early as the 15th over.
Yeah,
he'd done his mayhem and gone by the 15th over. He was gone like 67 or whatever. It's a crazy, crazy innings.
Sorry, just on the Lara point, I just wanted to read this out. So even this happens even before the Serendipity chapter, where he describes Lara as a global cricket hero. He's revered by Indian fans who always warmly embraced West Indian cricketers. However, side by side with that hero worship exists brutal prejudice. Booth bellowed the crowd. Booth means ghost or spirit. And in India, it's a derogatory epithet applied to those with black skin, usually members of depressed castes. So he's capturing the sort of conflicting emotion that we have for a global superhero, but also a black. And then where we get that thing for black, which comes from, looking at depressed castes as black. So he's captured all this. And then the best part is this. Racist chanting is not confined to Headingley.
Always that perspective.
Just one line. Like that's, we will call it burn, right? This is classic burn.
Absolute, total burn.
And these kind of burns are right there throughout. There's another line about solidarity. I mean, Sidhu was talking about solidarity matches. And he says, I always get excited about solidarity. The last time solidarity was used in England was when they sent those teams to, the sanctioned teams to South Africa in the 80s.
The rebel doors. Yeah. He's amazing. Actually, he's like he captured Lara also at quite a troubled time in his career. Like Lara was just becoming that, because he'd done the year at Warwickshire where he, carried a mobile phone out and stuff. He captured Lara at just a time when like West Indies was at its lowest. It was kind of falling apart, and Lara was had become this superstar, but this jaded superstar. And he has that quote of Lara shouting at the end, remember that he's on the plane back, I think, and he's saying that Lara is shouting.
Yeah, I got rid of Richardson, I'll get rid of you.
I got rid of Richardson, I got rid of this, I'll get rid of you as well, and all. It's Lara, inebriated Lara shouting all this. What a little observation just to catch. Imagine writing that about any superstar of cricket right now. As a journalist, you would think a million times even before writing something like that down. Or if you did, you would give it this really tabloidish kind of angle and say, global superstar drunk on flight and shouting and all and sparks controversy. Whereas he's just kind of thrown it at the back into this book Lara's just shouting, Lara's drunk and he's shouting and all. And thinking of Lara, I also thought 96, I'm trying to remember around that time, 94 to 97 or 98 is when I had completely gone off the radar for cricket. I was at uni in England, and at 96, the only game I watched was the India-Pakistan game in the World Cup. I forgot a lot of it. I watched a lot of it much after. But Tendulkar was also at this one stage at that time, was he, that people were not 100% sure about the freneticness of his batting sometimes, and if he started taking too many risks. Because I got that sense, and it surprised me that. Because, now you think to Tendulkar and you think that he was always this perfect, he was, and that Tendulkar ODI innings had come in 94, right, in New Zealand?
Yeah, the opening.
I think this was still a new avatar of Tendulkar, the pinch hitter or whatever. So it's interesting in that it catches him at that time as well, where people were still kind of unsure that, they're talking about Tendulkar as some kind of Rohit Sharma or something, okay, he's okay, but there's some doubts there and all, not quite sure of what he's like. And Salah, he's Tendulkar. This is Tendulkar.
I'm sorry. Ever since Rohit Sharma was born, Mahesh had no doubts about him being the greatest cricketer ever. So you're talking to the wrong audience here.
I'm talking to the wrong audience.
No, I know. Usman is my spiritual brother when it comes to Rohit Sharma. So
Rohit Sharma, Nobody gets him like we do. Okay, nobody gets him.
Yeah, I know. All full playlist brothers you guys are. I know.
Yeah, exactly. No, but it was interesting. I'd forgotten. Of course, that period was there, but I'd forgotten that there was that brief period before Tendulkar became ODI legend great, and he was still kind of proving his credentials. And that World Cup, I think he went some way towards proving.
Well, not so much proving. I think that there was a Tendulkar obsession. It's not the Rohit Sharma way. There was a Tendulkar obsession for the country. So everything that he did, we wanted him to do better. And there was a Test cricket Tendulkar who was like, who was like a world-class batsman, like who was fully consistent. He was aggressive and also
and correct as well and stuff.
Yeah, and correct and whatever. Whereas in the one dayers, I think he, like till 94, which was a fairly long period where he didn't score too many hundreds.
Yeah.
And that was the time where you're starting to score hundreds. Then you want him to score 100 every time. So, and with the kind of talent that he had, whatever he did was not enough for us. Like I remember being disappointed with the 90 itself. Like he scored the most breathtaking 90 in one-day cricket of all time.
That's the Australia game, right?
Yeah, the Australia game. Yeah. And I remember then I was still disappointed. And like, why did he get out? So he captures that. In fact, more than capturing this opinion that Sachin was not a fully formed sort of robo by that time, or whatever, this batsman by that time, the great batsman that Sachin later went on to become, it captures the country's insecurity about Sachin. Here's this great batsman who's an upgraded version of Sunny. And why is he not achieving more than what he's achieving? So it captures that phase of India's obsession with him.
And I found the child. What's the name of the child? I've forgotten. Who hates Tendulkar, of course.
Yeah, Samar,
who hates Tendulkar. But even after that innings, he's like, is it after that innings or another innings that he
No,
sees?
that's the Delhi innings. Yeah.
That's the Delhi innings that he sees. Yeah, where he's like, okay, whatever. But
no, the Delhi innings, in fact, the Sri Lanka innings is the first time in Tendulkar's career when he scored 100 and India lost. And, so that was the beginning. And of course, then that became a trend.
What a moment.
No, but I'll read the passage that we were talking about that brings that out actually. So he says about Tendulkar in that Bombay game, I quote, "To the technical orthodoxy he had inherited from the Bombay school of batsmanship, he added a new dimension of improvised but clinical power hitting developed to meet the demands of the one-day game. Critics had long urged him to curb his attacking instincts. They told him that if he played fewer risky shots, he could emulate Lara, occupy the crease for hours and make huge scores. They wanted a second Gavaskar, but Gavaskar himself was wise enough to urge Tendulkar to perfect his own style."
That's amazing.
So, yeah. And I really, that the thing about that book is Tendulkar's innings in Bombay, Shane Warne's bowling, and then Aravinda De Silva's innings, Mark Waugh's innings, the writing is just pristine. You just want to bottle that, and you want to understand how to write that way for cricket.
His match report of the Bangalore quarterfinal is phenomenal, by the way. To think that the match report is actually the least of it because of everything else he's capturing. But the match report itself is phenomenal. Like his talking about Waqar being jaded by that time and going for just Yorkers at the end and Jadeja, and even Waqar beating Sidhu 3 times in the first over. He captures the tensions at each stage of the innings being built or of the chase and stuff. It's phenomenal. Like it's really good match writing. And then around it, he's got everything else. And the way he's kind of, writing, how difficult it is to kind of structure these things. And so, if you're structuring a chapter like that, where you're talking, and I think I actually tried, without thinking about it too much, but I tried to emulate him. I don't think I got there, but I tried to emulate him in Unquiet Ones, where you're writing about one match, but you're also pulling in everything around that match, the history, the future, back into it. The way he's done it in this is phenomenal, in what he talks about and how he kind of mixes both micro and macro. It's one of the strengths of the book. It's one of the bits of genius about this book is how he does it at no cost to the other. The quality does not fall in either aspect of the writing.
And what I love about the whole book and every chapter is it challenges the reader. It's not now in these days, social media and all, you have this concept of this relatability. I could relate perfectly to this, but Mike's not interested in relatability. He's saying, you think about it. I want you to think. I want you to read it. I, in fact, want you to disagree with me. But as long as you think, I'm fine. So that is like writing at a higher level. It's not just like resonating with the reader, but it's also actually putting the reader in a spot to say, okay, now what do you think about that?
They're making the reader think about it. Exactly. Yeah. Which like you say, I don't think it happens. I don't think it happens in any, it's not just cricket. I don't think it happens in a lot of writing generally in this age, in this day and age where, and it has its strengths that you want people to feel and you want them to feel or relate to things. That has its strengths, of course, but it shouldn't be at the cost of something like this. Yeah,
it's extremely cerebral book at various levels. I mean, I'm proofing and editing this book, like Mahesh, I've probably read it some 15 times, but every time you are reading something, you're like, there's that one line or thought that comes into your head and it just sticks with you, and you're thinking about it and you're like, yeah, I mean, that's how did he think of that? How did he think of that in the middle of writing about a cover drive? How did that come to him?
My main thing is that I'm really glad that the book is, like, I've always had the book, so I never felt it was missing, but it's so good to have a book like this, like, just be part of a conversation again. And I really, really hope that a lot of, like, younger readers and younger listeners that you guys have, like, take the time to get into this book, because it not just about the many things that he's written about and the actual content, but it's also, like we've discussed on the podcast, the method of the way he went about doing it, and getting his points across and getting his philosophies across, and without haranguing us, without hectoring us, without lecturing us, to bring that kind of insight as a foreigner to that region also. That's, there's a real lesson there, that you go into some place, you go in with a completely, like, blank mind, and you let these things come to you, and you're of course informed by your experiences and stuff. I think it's a masterpiece in tour writing, travel writing, political writing, and sports writing. It's an absolute masterpiece, and I'm just really, really happy that it's out there in the public again. And long may it live and exist.
Yeah, we will ensure that it exists as long as we can have it exist. I mean, we now have the distribution rights, and we are going to make sure that it keeps, and it's so timeless. I mean, whenever there is like a big tournament in the subcontinent, this is like the reference book, because if you want to know how things were and how things have shaped, here it is. You just have it right here, and we would love for. 20. There's a World Cup in India in 2 years' time. There'll probably be more World Cups in India. We'll probably host every World Cup at some point of time. But and in true Mike style, like England used to back then. So
yes.
We have to add that too.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Power always.
So it's a timeless classic. So yeah, thank you for that. And lovely to have you talk about it. I mean, we heard Sharda, we heard Fidel, and then to have your perspective, it's amazing. I mean, it just builds on the whole, collective knowledge that we have about the book, and just to discuss a book with someone who likes it is.
I'm very thankful to be on it. You had told me about this. You had noted it down a while ago, and the first thing I was excited because it gave me the opportunity to read it again. It's just a really great book to read. Like, if you're on a long flight and you love cricket and you love good writing, then, like, I cannot recommend any book as strongly as this. Maybe like Pandits, I can recommend, just read this book. While, it's just a great, great book to read, full of great writing, full of great lines, full of great thoughts and ideas about the game, and full of, it's like just this one mirror also to show the game what it is, and it's a mirror, like you say, it's, you said it's timeless, and it is, but it's also very much of its time. That's the beauty of it, is that it captures that time so perfectly, but it is also in what it finds and what it talks about, what it writes. It's also timeless. It's an absolute masterpiece. I think am I right in thinking that it doesn't make it to many, like, all-time they're very arbitrary lists, of course, but it doesn't make it to, like, a lot of all-time ones. And I would say that it is, for me, it's there, like, in the top. I don't know, like, I don't like ranking things, but if you ask me to name some of my favorite books ever, this will be there, like, at the very top of my mind, always.
Yeah, and one of the problems, I think, why it is not there among many of these lists is it's very hard to get. Yeah, it's very hard to source. And, it went out of print pretty early, and I don't think it really came back. So, this is a chance for as many people as to read it.
What you should do, you should get in touch with Lawrence Booth at the Almanac and do a piece on this for Wisden, because they have that book section also, in which there should definitely be mention of this.
He knows it's out, and hopefully he will do that. He will take that up.
I'm sure he would have liked this book as well. He would have read it and he would have liked this book.
Yeah, and the thing is, this book, I think it speaks to so many people. It speaks to young people, it speaks to students, but it also speaks to serious academics. This is a very serious academic work as well, to understand the politics of the subcontinent at the time. This is also a very good book for every cricket writer to read. And forget cricket writer, I think this is a great book for Americans to read to understand cricket as well, because the writing is so original. It's not, your typical cricket report. It is a very refreshing take on cricket. So yeah, hopefully many will read it. And Osman, more than happy to send you a copy of the latest edition, by the way. So all I need is...
I don't want to like deprive somebody of a copy. Like I have this copy and I love it. I don't want
Amazon
to
is printing on demand. There's no limit to it, by the way.
That's true.
You're depriving us of a few dollars. That's about it.
I wouldn't even like to do that. Yeah,
Come on,
publishers. You need all the dollars that you can get. You guys are publishers now, okay?
We want everybody to have the latest one. We want everybody to read the
I'm
Gideon.
serious.
I would love, with the Gideon forward, that's almost worth it also to have one. So I would love, absolutely love a copy.
Just address and phone number is all I need. So just mail it to me.
I will arrange it.
Mahesh, final thoughts? What do you think?
Yeah, 96 World Cup is very close to my heart. It is. It's not a World Cup that's looked back at fondly by people, but it's a World Cup that's very close to my heart. And I read this book pretty late in my life, and like Osman said, it's probably there in the top 5 cricket books of all time for me easily, and it captures cricket politics at an important hinge point. But more importantly, it captures the politics and the economic sort of implications of those 3 countries at a very critical sort of point where we're looking at Pakistan where it is today, looking at India where it is today, and the trials and tribulations of all these politics of all these countries, including Sri Lanka. Like even the relationship between the government's approach to LTTE and how it pivoted, everything is captured at an important hinge point here. So for every reason, you should read that book. And even from a globalization perspective, I was thinking that even beyond the IMF, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka thing, if you look at what's happening between US and China, today when I was reading about it, you're realizing that he had listed out all the perils of the actions that they all took at a point where it suited them, to what is happening now in terms of Brexit, in terms of the friction between Germany and Russia right now going on. All that resonates in its own sort of capacity within the scope of cricket here. But you could connect to all that we see right now. All the the whole let's say Trump is a product of these repressed feelings of globalization, right? And all that is captured here, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, this book was formative. It had a big role to play in my shaping up as a cricket writer and as a writer in general. It also had a big role to play in how I generally viewed cricket, and how I always tried to sort of take that view of not being too partisan, but at the same time not being too detached as well. So to be in that zone where you're a fan, but you're not, resorting to ugly partisanship. And to actually be able to own these distribution rights and to be able to spread the word and to have younger readers read it, it's like a great feeling for me. If somebody who's, in their 20s reads this book and is inspired to take up cricket writing or take up any form of writing, there's no better gift for me than that. So, that is my hope, that a lot of people read it and a lot of people are actually taken what it says. So, all right. So, thanks a lot for doing this. Osman, thank you so much for encouraging
this
and
book
being
anytime.
Yeah, absolutely. And we did a podcast with Osman about his own book. I will link that. Please read that book as well. A classic in its own right. We at some point, Osman, hopefully we will own that book as well.
Yes.
Kidding.
25 years from now, somebody will republish, hopefully.
And I usually end by, asking you to buy us a coffee, but I won't ask you to do that now. Instead, buy the book for yourself. It will help us also, but it will also just be a great way to support this podcast and support 81 All Out. So I will give you the Amazon link. I will give the various links in various geographies, so you can go click wherever. If you're in India, e-copy, but you may want to check out Amazon.com and see if they can ship it to you. If you are elsewhere, you can just go to your specific Amazon site and order it. You can please download the podcast app. Go to our website, 81allout.com, for all previous episodes. You can also, leave a review and a rating on the podcast. That will really help us. And continue to listen. Hearty thank you to everyone who has been with us for this journey. And we hope to continue to do these podcasts and get back to you with another episode pretty soon.
India have won the Test match. India have won the series. They're going to get back for two. India at home. Lords goes wild.